Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another chapter of our Risk Academy. Today we're in Chapter 5, about halfway through, and we're going to worry about our assets. That's right. Before you can do anything with risk, you have to identify your assets, what it is you're actually trying to protect. So we're going to get in today and we're going to talk about how to identify them, identification. Then we need to classify them. We'll go through classification. And the last we'll talk about ownership. All of these will feed into the rest of the material that we have in the chapters. Because if you don't know what to protect, then you don't know. You know, the old phrase, you don't know what you don't know, that will bite us if we're not careful. So this is all about identifying the things we have to protect. Okay, we talked about you have to figure out what your assets are. So we're now talking about identification. How are we going to identify an asset? Literally, what is an asset? The first thing you need to understand is the asset is anything that has value to your organization. Literally, it's something of value to you, to your specific organization, your specific instance. We typically have thought of assets as the old physical things you put the little tag on and you have to go around and inventory them. That's because you purchased those. And things that are purchased are an asset. However, we've now moved into the modern world with electronics and other things, and all of a sudden you have generated a lot of data. We're in the healthcare field, all kinds of patient information, along with, you may also include all the, the Social Security number and the billing information for your patients. So now you've got their personally identifiable information as well as protected health information. So that data, but we typically see it in two forms. You have the electronic data, the things that are in your servers, practice management systems, electronic health records, so to speak. And then you have physical data, the physical chart. You know, that has been the most common thing that is in any medical practice. Even in long-term care, where you're going from place to place, there's still physical pieces of paper that have to be protected. All right? Also, something of value you probably have not thought of is your intellectual property. It's what you do better than others. Okay, so if you have a particular process, maybe you're running a triage call center that is done a specific way that nobody else does. That process is making you money. It provides a value to you. So you've got to think of that. I always talk about intellectual property as like, you know, if I gave you an old sheet of paper that's 100 years old now, it's about 70 years old now, in fact, that has some writing on it and it's worth less than a penny, would you take it? Yes or no? If the writing on that was the Colonel Sanders' secret recipe, you would take that in a heartbeat. That is worth billions of dollars. That sheet of paper and the writing on it isn't worth nothing if you look at the purchased value of it, but to the actual intellectual property value to that corporation, it is worth billions and billions of dollars. So you have to determine the value of all of the things that you have and determine, okay, this data, our electronic health record where all our patient information is in, that's worth money. The data where we actually have our practice management, where we send off and send our charges out and collect the money, helps us manage our practice. That is worth some money to you. If you're running, the triage call center, that is worth some money to you. Okay? All of these things have value to you as an organization, and identifying those things that do have value is the first step. It's not all the steps, but is the very first step. First, we identify what kind of value there is. Now, specifically when we talk about the realm of intellectual property and data, obviously your purchased things have value, theft value, things like that. You have two different types of value here to worry about. One is an actual real value, to worry about. That real value, how much did that actually make you? How much income can you generate off of that data that you have? That's a real value to you. Something else you need to be aware of, there's a value on the dark web for value for your information. Okay, if someone got the Colonel Sanders secret recipe that's on that sheet of paper, if it's in electronic form and they steal that, how much do you think they could sell that to? All of the manufacturers that have gone overseas and had all of their intellectual property stolen, and then magically, 3 months later, a competing company from a foreign country is making the same thing you are, and they're selling it at half the cost, that has value to you as well. This dark web, specifically for medical records on the dark web, HIMSS estimates that every medical record is worth $363. If you collect 10 medical records on the dark, and try to sell them on the dark web, they'll figure you get about $3,600 for it. Start multiplying that number times the amount of medical records that you actually have. Think of your patients. Patient file. How many patients do you have? If you have 10,000 patients, that's $3.63 million. You may not generate that much information or that much real value to your business, but it is worth that much to someone to attack you. So you need to also consider not just what it's worth to you, but sometimes the value, you need to think about what it's worth to the people that want to steal it as well. All right, so we've talked about assets or something you have of value. Well, one of the very next things you need to do is literally you write them all down on a list. Pick a spreadsheet, Word document, a piece of scratch paper, write everything down, okay? Once you're done with that, the next thing you need to do is you need to classify them. And in terms of classification, you can look at them in two different ways. You can look at it in intrinsic value, how much money it would be worth to your organization. That is a very good way of ranking them. It could also be how sensitive they are to your business operations. For example, that process that we talked about that has value to your organization you make money with, that if you're doing the call center, triage call center, may make money, but it also may be very critical to what you do. Something that may not cost a lot of money, if you think about a secure messaging app to go between the cell phones, so that your practice and the physicians can securely communicate on their phones, or if you're extending that out to the facilities and letting them work, that actually may not cost you a whole lot of money, but it is a big critical piece for you to communicate with. So that's another way to look at this. On here, I've done a reverse pyramid, and I never bring it to close at the bottom on purpose, because even your public data has some value to you. If you think of your public website that you have, you paid money to have that built, so it is worth something. That marketing that's done on that website is worth something. So even public data is still worth something to you. What I have here is the common corporate structures classification levels that we need to use. We start at the bottom. We'll talk about publicly available data. So that is something that if it is stolen, it's not going to affect you at all, like your public website. Or if you've downloaded, for example, reports from CMS, you'll be able to have anyone steal that and it won't be an issue. Then you get to sensitive data. It's worth to you a little bit more. All right, it's not that big of a deal, but it is. So I equate sensitive data with things like what happens if you have a list of salaries for all your employees and an internal person gets access to that. What kind of impact would that have on your organization if the sensitivity, if that got out? You can also look at these as sort of impact, very high impact, low impact if something happened, it was compromised. So in your sensitive data level. Then you have private data. These are things that would cause the business some issues. Think of your your confidential contracts that you have with facilities. If you're going to different facility chains and you've got contract with facility chain A and a different contract with different terms than facility chain B, do you really want those facilities to see what's in each other's contracts? Or maybe your financials that really only need to be shared with, the business leaders in your business. So that's typically private. Confidential information is a special category. This is where your intellectual property is at, the things that you do differently. This is where anything that's privileged communication between you and legal counsel needs to go. These are things that are extremely critical to the business. The most important things go in the confidential realm. Special note, if you label things as confidential, especially communication that you want to have internally, they have some special protections against in civil lawsuits. People have to prove that they need that information to make their case to a judge in order for them to release that. So that is something you want to speak to your legal counsel about, making sure in your individual state, that varies by state by the way, your individual state what you can mark confidential and what you can't. And when you do it, you need to make sure you mark it. But the most important here for confidential for classification is those are the things that are typically it's the biggest money makers that you have. You want to make sure that information is loaded right there. If you think again in terms of impact, low impact, extremely high impact. Okay, we've found your assets, we've identified them, and then we've classified them, in terms of really impact. What would the impact to your organization if that asset was no longer there or was compromised? One of the other things you need to identify when you get with assets is actually there's sort of categories on who actually owns this. So you kind of got, if you think of terms of data, is really where we use these. You have something called a data owner. This is the person that is accountable to your organization to make sure that data is protected. This is typically not your IT staff. You, as a business owner or business manager, are telling them how to protect it. For most of us, it's here's the HIPAA rules, protect it so it's this. But as a business, that data is owned by the business. It is not owned by IT. We too often get in the mold of IT telling us what to do, and we shouldn't. And I say that with 30 years or more experience in IT. You should be dictating to us how to protect this information. So the owner is really a business person. You tell them how they need to protect it. Again, for most of us, it's in the HIPAA rules, protect it this way. A data custodian is typically your IT folks. They take care of it for you. All right? So if you think of this in terms of a pet, say you've got a dog and you want to take your dog to a dog sitter. So you as the owner take your dog to the dog sitter and you explain to them they get fed this way, they go, they get walked this way, only this food that I've provided. You as the pet owner are telling them what to do. As the pet sitter, they are the custodian. They are doing it for you. They're handling the care and feeding of your pet. The same way with data. You tell IT what to do, and they then put it on their systems, and they manage it and maintain it and protect it the way you want them to. Those HIPAA rules are really good for that. Okay. Sometimes you run into an issue where you've got multiple things. Like say, if you're outsourcing your billing, and you outsource it to a billing party. Okay, they're the custodians for your data. It's your data. You tell them how to protect it. Well, they may be outsourcing that stuff where the data is kept, the physical devices and logical devices, to third party. So they may not run it themselves. They may outsource all of their IT to someone else. Those people are system owners. So it's literally a kind of a step where you're outsourcing to someone and then someone's outsourcing to someone else. It's really important, though, the ownership is identified up front. Everybody in that chain has to follow the rules that the owner sets. Just like for your pet, you want to make sure that the pet sitter, or if they're using maybe their child to help them if it's on a weekend, that they follow your rules and they take care of your information the same way you would want a pet sitter to take care of your dog. Okay, folks, so today we've talked about assets, specifically how to ID them. We're going to identify them. Then we need to classify them in terms of impact if they're compromised or not available to your organization. And we talked about the fact that ownership, you as the business owner need to dictate terms to everybody else who takes care of your data for you, especially your data. All right? So now we will go, the next chapter will be number 6, and we're actually going to talk about how to identify a risk. Because now we found the things of value to us, now we have to identify the risks from those.